You know, people ask me all the time, why do you do this? Why do you not retire and read books and write fancy academic papers? And I say, yes, that is also important. But what is more important is that I was given an opportunity to read books in the first place, to engage with ideas because of the sacrifices of ordinary people. And so part of scholarship must be given back to the people in the form of public engagement. If I tell about a public scholar, what we call an activist scholar or a scholar activist, who's always trying to use the knowledge that is gained from reading books, from observing people in their communities, in their society, and giving them back, in the words of a UC Kwayana, giving them back to the people as a political nourishment and by extension, cultural nourishment. That's what I'm about. It's about being that public scholar whose work is not just confined to the classroom, but that classroom is extended to the public space. I'm David.
Mr. Watts, he's armed himself shots. Shots, watch it, tear gas. Light rounds. Also, I can see that.
But since my cousin there, no, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me.
Right? No, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me.
You gotta listen to me too, man.
I am listening to
right? Now, I see you on the East Coast. The day when they get a protest of them, the next day, that's when you see one bigger heads come up to talk to my family. Right? And that's bad. If we didn't do a protest, we want to see nobody for justice. You see? I'm not holding back nothing. I'm not holding back nothing. I just need justice of my family.
If you hear me, black is beautiful. Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a texture. Lift your head like me. You got to wear it for with dignity. How it burn out. Black is beautiful. I said, sing it along. Black is beautiful. Say, I'm black and brown. It's high time that we get rid of that old slave mentality.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
And welcome to Politics 101. Late start for us tonight. This happens sometimes when one juggles so many things as we have to do. It is part of the work that, as they say, put bread and butter on the table, but also the people's work. And we want to combine the two. Sometimes things get a little bit crossed and we have to shift things around. And that happens sometime. But here we are, Politics 101, one of the programs that has filled a very important void. But as you can attest, it has extended the boundaries of political communication, certainly over the last 3 to 5 years. And so here we are on a Wednesday evening coming at you. And tonight we are going to have Tacuma Ogunseye is already backstage. And if Guyanese did not know that name before the last 3 weeks or so, they now know that name. It has now become a household name, Tacuma Ogunseye. And on your screen is also an image that must be well known by now. In fact, I'm encouraging you adults to share that image with your children, with young people, so they can get a sense of the linkage between the past and the present, how the present is a reflection of the past. Historical memory is a hell of a thing. People try to deny you historical memory. Let's not talk about the hurt of the past. I heard a political leader in the United States today, Mr. Tim Scott, in announcing what could be a bid for the presidency. He's a Republican from South Carolina, and he says his platform is going to be a platform against the politics of grievance. That African Americans should not engage in the politics of grievance, that we should forget about the past and pay attention to the present. That old narrative of denying a group of people a glimpse into their history, denying them a large part of their reality. And of course, when that history is a history that is grounded in the most inhumane aspect, the most inhumane system in the history of humanity, then you're denying those people justice. But sometimes those who would like to deny us a glimpse into our history, by their own works, they present that history to us. And when you look at that image, a black man shackled in 2023, and a young black man with a uniform stooping down to remove those shackles from the feet. It takes us right back 400 years. And so in a way, while the PPP is trying to erase African history from our minds, because it doesn't understand how history works and how society works, it presents that history in a very poignant way to us. A black man dressed in African wear, and a black policeman stooping down to remove the shackles from his feet. If there was any denial on our part that Guyana is a state that is steeped in apartheid social relations, this image tells the story. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. A little unfamiliar background tonight, but because I am doing the show on the road, as I said at the beginning, that sometimes we have to do it wherever we could do it. I remember as a little boy, Dr. Walter Rodney, wherever he was, he would be writing on a day clean, or writing something, and then you learn later on he was writing part of how the history of the Guyanese working people. So when he was waiting to speak at a public meeting, or he was in the back of a car as we were driving to public, he was always writing, always doing something. And so therefore, wherever we are, we've got to do this work. So I'm on the road. And so we're doing Politics 101 from the road tonight. So welcome to all of you. And please let everyone know that we are on and we have Tacuma Ogunseye on tonight. Let's bring Brother Tacuma up. Good evening, Brother Tacuma.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Hines.
And how are you this evening?
I'm fine.
Well, I know that you come from the choir night school and that you don't like to bring attention to yourself and you would rather speak about other things and other people. But tonight you'll have to speak a little bit, if not about yourself, but about developments that you have been influential in scripting, if you will. Let me start off with a question, and I know you're charged and you're before the courts, and your lawyer will obviously tell you that there are things that you ought not to discuss, and so we want to respect that. But so my questions are political and not quote unquote legal. Let me start with the obvious question, and that is, why do you think that a member of what we in Guyana call a small political party mounting a platform on a Thursday night and giving a normal, or what seemed normal, political speech has ignited the kind of firestorm that we've seen in our politics in the last month?
Okay, before I answer the question, I want to use the opportunity to express my satisfaction and happiness with the kind of response I've got both as an individual and the WPA, the solidarity that was being extended both in the country and abroad. You know, I want to acknowledge it. Those comrades who have found it, you know, went out of their way to find some way to help one way or the other. It was very encouraging. And I really want to take the opportunity to thank them all. And I also want to point out in Guyana and abroad, a lot of the persons who call, they're warning me to be very careful with my security, and they're convinced that you can't rule out that the government may want to execute you, assassinate you. I mean, this is where the PPP have arrived at. That persons see the PPP government as a government that is capable of assassinating political opponents. I guess the Waddle and the Courtney Coming issues are very much in person's mind. But I raised the issue to show where the PPP have arrived at in the consciousness of Guyanese, and this cut across race. You know, people just recognize this regime as, unlike the coalition regime under the APMU AFC, people are seeing this regime as a murderous regime. And I think they should take note of it. That is how they're being conceived across the country, both at home and abroad. Yes, to answer the question, I will answer it this way. The WPA has always been an important political player in Guyanese politics for many years. And even though many persons have predicted that we're dead, or we're dying, or we become irrelevant, the truth of the matter, in a real way, given our history and our commitment to the country, and a sense of social and political and racial justice, the WPF always hold a very important place in Guyanese politics. And to the extent that we throw our weight one way or the other, it always have profound effects in the country politics. Since the WPA came into being, okay, we have, in a way, I don't want to say revolutionized because that might be too profound a word, but we have impacted the politics of the country in a profound way. We had the civil rebellion and everything that followed that, the anti-dictatorial struggle, the struggle for fair and free elections, where the WPA play a major role. And then coming up fast tracking, when we come to 2015, the formation of the APMU that led to the APMU AFC that outs the PPP, So the party have always at critical juncture play an important role, despite the fact that people try to play down our importance. Now, in this situation, I think the rulers got entrapped with their own political logic. Okay? You see, the PPP have arrived at a place where they're not being political. They're not engaging in politics and seeing other political players as equal and legitimate players in the political equation. So when the WPA takes positions, they totally ignore it. And consequences got consequences. Now, let us go back to the election mobilization. The WPA, when we organized meetings as WPA, not as the APMU AFC, we made a big weather of the importance of the oil discovery and the fact that we want oil to be used, to address historical injustices. And we push hard the WPA Clive Thomas proposal for cash transfer to Guyanese households. And we commit in the public space that regardless of which party win the elections, the WPA will be relentless on those issues. So that was a very public commitment. And to fast track, when we spoke at the second opposition rally at Golden Grove, the first one was at Parade Ground, and the second one, the WPA executive, I represent the party there, had a very clear message in which we identify 5 or 6 critical issues which we felt that when you look at it, you can't separate any of them. And that once you don't separate them, we head them for, a confrontation with the regime. I don't know if they were listening, but that was clear public, announcement. I say all this to say that the WPA intervention was not incidental. It was deliberate, it was calculated, and it was influenced by certain things. It was influenced by the way in which the government behaved after it came to power in the controversial elections. It was influenced by the way in which they began to use oil resources in a very partisan way. It was influenced, by the clear approach by the government to try to neutralize the politics of the African community and to use state resources to buy over Africans, so that we have to go to the PPP with our begging bowls. And more important, the timing of the intervention in a big way was influenced by 2 things. The way in which the government dealt with the Mocha crisis, the Mocha situation where they demolished African poor people homes, and the announcement of local government elections in the context of our commissioners saying that what took place in GCOM cannot deliver transparent and fair and free elections. And the PPP was relentless in their pursuit. And that creates a moment which the WPA had to act, both in the defense of African dignity and both in defense of the national interests. And we had to intervene. Now, the question of You see, I have a little doubt, I differ with some people on the PPP's response. Persons tend to feel that what tilt the scale and to generate the kind of response to the PPP is my appeal to the army, the military, to turn the guns away from protesters and turn it in another direction. And I understand why people think so. But in more deeper thinking, I think the PPP was offended by the fact that the WPA was able to strip all the work that they did in the last 2 years, in which even the African community had reached a point where we were debating whether our people sell to the PPP. I think it's that destruction of that narrative and to re-energize Africans to make a political statement against PPP's domination. I think that's what brought the wrath of the PPP out. They've heard my position on the military before. It's not a new position. When I spoke on AGDA platform a couple of years ago, on the so-called Riot Act speech, it was the same logic I was arguing. So I don't think it is so much that. I think the problem was we stripped them, and we destroy what they built, systematically for 2 years. And I think that is what really brought the wrath out against me, and more importantly, against the WPA. That is how I see it.
Tacuma Ogunseye, they're making a very profound point, and I want us to ponder that point that he's making, which is the stripping of the dictatorship, of the narrative that it used to mask its own objectives. And in one speech lasting nothing more than 30 minutes, we were able to strip them of that. And nothing offends a dictatorship than when he or she is stripped naked. The emperor is without clothes. And that is what we did at Buxton. And sometimes, Brother Ogunseye, the enemy, and I'm using that word because I think they're no longer our competitors. They have proven that we are enemies. The enemy helps to make your case in sometimes a stronger way than you make it. The shackling of Brother Ogunseye, Mr. Jagdio coming out and lashing at the WPA, libeling the WPA in public, suggesting that there is some kind of plan between the WPA and the PNC, making reference to Buxton. Why did they go to Buxton? In a sense, they create the narrative to substantiate what that intervention meant, Brother Ogunseye.
Yeah, you're quite right. I really don't care much about what Jagdi will think, whether he thinks that it's a plan worked out by the WP and the PNC. I don't want to give him comfort one way or the other. But I know that WPA acts in its own right, and we intervene based upon our best judgment. And I think that the events have proven that our intervention was timely, and it got the response, and as you said, even more than we probably have anticipated. By the way in which they respond. You see, what I find, worrying, there's a way in which we know what the PPP has become. And we know that with the oil money and the power craziness in the regime, that they're prone to make certain kinds of political mistakes, and they're prone to excesses. But what I find, well, I don't want to say even disturbing, is that they will seek to make a case not on what you actually say, but fabricate, okay, a narrative, which which forced me to raise the question of kind of fascist kind of politics coming out from the PPP. And then once you do that, now you bring the whole might of the state on everybody to jump behind your narrative, and you expect them to obey you. And if they don't obey you, like what happened to the Guyana Human Rights Association, you come down with the heavy hand of the state. This is a kind of worrying development. It's a very worrying development. I think it's gone beyond what we have over the decades understand to be dictatorial behavior. I think that we're entering into a kind of new territory, where political actors with power is not satisfying that because they are government and they have power, that power will automatically force many people to side with them, whether they're right or they're wrong, and they benefit from that. But when a government, decide that this is a line of march, it is erroneous, it's not based on facts and the evidence, and will launch a whole campaign and bring all the might to the state just to get their own way. To me, it's a new development. And that is why I feel that the WP and persons like ourselves, we have to stand up for Guyana. You see, in this is a struggle for African dignity, and it's a struggle for national dignity. It is a struggle for African leadership to stand up to this government and to say, whatever you throw at us, we're going to fight back, both in the interest of our community and the interest of the nation. We cannot allow the PPP to continue to be a runaway train unopposed. And I think we have arrived at the junction, and in the context of oil and everything, that you have to have a major political engagement to change the whole government relationships in the country. And as we said, this is a matter of urgency. It's not something that could wait for another election cycle, And I'm being serious, because we have pondered upon this very seriously. The consequences of the oil discovery have profound effects on national interests. And if we're not careful, within a few years, African Indians could be a minority in their own country. When this economy begins to take off with oil and all the other economic sectors of the economy begin to move afoot, external interests with the businesses will bring in more and more workers to work. And 750,000 people is not much to displace. And while African Indians fight on the coast and we fight in the country, we can't agree for nothing as a nation to defend our historical patronage, we will lose it. And that is our concern in the WPA, that this is not simply only an ethnic problem. The ethnic problem is one important manifestation of the problem. But to the extent that we don't address the ethnic problem, we don't create the basis for defense of the country in the new dynamics that we face.
And Brother Ogun, I'm glad you went to oil and gas, because let's put this in context. That ultimately, what the PPP is doing, whether it's its appeal to ethnicity, whether it's trying to crush the opposition, whether it is closing off access to the democratic institutions in the society. At the end of the day, the objective is to control a state and a society that is going to be flushed with oil wealth. And they want control of that oil wealth. And you then ask the question, to what end? To what end? Now, you raise the question of the external forces, but the internal dynamics of Guyana, historically, from the time of independence, who governs? That's one question. And when we ask who governs in Guyana, it's about which ethnic group governs. Second, who gets to control the economic pie in the country? And when we ask who gets to control, there is, of course, class control. But ultimately, it's about ethnicity, given the way in which our society has developed. Is there not a fear that the PPP's plan will entrench ethnic domination by one ethnic group by virtue of their ultimate control of the wealth that is coming, and the using that wealth to control the political decision making that could really, even in the face of external forces, really transform Guyana from where it exists as a multi-ethnic society to one of a deeply unequal society ethnically?
Yes, I mean, look, even without oil, the PPP ran the country from 92 to 2015. And in that period, what we saw is that they deliberately shift resources from the state to the ethnic community and the ethnic constituency. And it reached a point where nobody will argue that the Indian domination of the economy, or the non-African domination of the economy is not a reality. I don't think African Americans probably only own but 10% of the national pie. So we are already on that line of march. And what the PP is trying to use oil to do is to consolidate and to extend that domination. And that is why we in the WP argue that oil and gas offers an opportunity to correct historical injustices. And any, well-intended group of politicians or political party would have given a commitment to that line of march that, now before we could have argued we don't have enough funds. But now that funds will not, be a major issue for us, we have a chance to correct historical wrongs. The Amerindians, the Africans, and so, who have been, excluded in a major way from the, from the economy, need to be facilitated, and this is important, not because you can't have a country, man, where half of the population only own 10% of the wealth. And God, I don't know. Sometimes, I don't know what our political discourse has become, because it is so obvious that if we don't put an end to the line of march that the PP is on, the ethnic consolidation and so forth and so forth, the country will explode. Even if the WPA come off the map, even if I die tomorrow, you die tomorrow, the consequences of that line of march, it can't work. So it goes without question that political domination and ethnic domination in the context of the Guyana reality is unworkable. It's unworkable. And my fear is that, if I think our generation, you and I, and, the little younger ones, like Kodaki, them up to that point, if we don't resolve this problem, we pass it on to the younger generations, it will be the greatest crime, political crime, a generation have done to another generation. We have not prepared our young people to deal with the challenges that they will be faced in dealing with all of the global vampires and all kinds of interests. We haven't prepared them. I listen to young political people who surface in all the parties, and I can't find any of them with an enlightened vision and any consistency in their political advocacy. And a lot of them may be running for replacement of this leader and the leader, but then you can't look at nothing in their record, in the public advocacy. So you could say, look, over the years, this young person, have been developing in a certain way. And I think that our generation, to me, if this got to be the last fight, we got to fix Guyana. This is how I see it.
Brother Ogunseye, they're making a profound point about the generational responsibility. And, if I may say that the Ogunseyes and the David Hineses of this world, we were handed a society and a struggle by the Kwayanas and the Bagwans and the Clive Thomas at a different point in time. And so when you hear Ogunseye says that the responsibility is upon us, it is profound. It is profound. Brother Ogunseye, you spoke about external forces. You spoke about the young people just now. We saw a very important intervention. And although it involved a person, I think it involved a tendency. We saw a Kit Nascimento came out with a pointed message, and he was endorsed by a Sridhar Ramphal. Now let me repeat. A Kit Nascimento came out with a particular message. Of course, that message was demolished by Hines and Rick Ford to the point where he came back with a video that got personal with us, all right? But forget about that. The intervention by Kit Nascimento, endorsed by Sridhar Ramphal, explain to our young people and even some of our older people what's the significance of that intervention.
In the case of Kit, I think, we came from a tradition where we don't like to accuse people of racism lightly. And despite I have all kinds of questions, about people like Kit Nascimento, I think Kit Nascimento have always been driven by a kind of supremacist mentality. He sees himself as a white person, whether he wants to see his Portuguese or white, and he has a kind of dislike, and I would say even hate for African people. I really don't like to go down this road because you could also be making a bad judgment of people. But I'm hard pressed not to feel in Kid position is not a kind of racist kind of thing. I remember when the Honorable Farrakhan visited Guyana, he went out his way to attack Farrakhan in a way that was uncalled for. So I think that this gentleman, he suffered from that kind of prejudice. And since he's a political prostitute, basically, he sell his soul to the PPP. And I think that whether they call him out or he choose to come out, I don't know which one, his actions for me weren't surprising. The one that caught me was Ramphal. We haven't heard from Ramphal on Guyanese politics in a partisan way. We know he's active in the border defense and so. And I was taken back by that one. I said, why would he at this moment, want to join into the affray? And to be honest, I haven't worked out in my mind clearly what is his motivation. Um, I know there's a concerted effort by the Indian lobbies, okay, some public and some privately, to defend Indian interests, and some of them define Indian interests as PPP interests, and they don't make a separation. And if they feel that the PPP interest is being threatened, they see it as Indian interest being threatened, and they decide, that they got to gang up. It's like how the Jewish lobby in North America behaves. Once you touch one, you touch all. And I must admit, I haven't worked out Ramphel intervention properly, but I feel, he's influenced by that. And there's another aspect of this thing, which is class-based. You see, I know Guyanese society. I'm around long. And I know it is easy for them to attack a Ogunseye, a market man, than to attack a lawyer or a doctor. And I think a lot of them get entrapped with that they feel they lose nothing much going after Ogunseye, because in their view, okay, he's a insignificant person socially. And I think that's a deep prejudice in people like Ramphel, people like Kit, people like Nandalal. As much as I got problems with Jagdeo, I don't put Jagdeo in that category, right? But people like Nandalal, I think, they have a kind of deep prejudice for ordinary people who emerge in the political equation and exerting the kind of influence that we exert through the WP. I think they can't handle it.
Tacuma Ogunseye here tonight on Politics 101. We started a little bit late, but we're rolling. Just want to announce that on Sunday night at Pleasance Line Top, the WPA will be holding a public meeting. Brother Tacuma Ogunseye will be the main speaker. Other speakers include Dion Abrams, Kidaki Amsterdam, Elton McCrae, and others. So those of you on the East Coast in Pleasance, Sunday night at 6 o'clock at Pleasance Line Top, the WPA will continue its weekly public meeting. Brother Tacuma Ogunseye will be the main speaker. I know many of you have been trying to get in touch with me. Really, I've not had the time to respond to emails, to return calls, etc. It's tight. Today, for example, I'm doing an 18-hour day. As I said, I'm doing the show on the road. Hopefully, in another couple of weeks, that pressure will ease and I'll be able to answer emails and text messages and return calls and so forth. So bear with me. So Sunday night at Pleasance, there would be the WPA a public meeting. Brother Tacuma, let's tilt on the other side. We saw Brother Moses Bagwan, an Indian, like Ramphel, right? Coming out with a couple of letters. Rohit Kanai, another WPA member, coming out with a couple of letters in the press. But we saw as soon as Moses Bagwan letter hit the press, someone who is an assistant to the president, we understand, jumped on Moses' letter. In the Guyana Times today, that person, Dr. Randy Prasad, described Moses as part of the lunatic fringe. What is the significance of a Moses Bagwan intervention and the way in which the government has jumped on him?
It is very important because it is not just Moses' intervention. I think they're being caught off guard because they have been convinced themselves that all the WPA Indians somehow have problems with the African elements in the party, and there's some great disunity, and there's some big drift from the past and the present. And I think that when both Ruth Kanai and Moses intervene, I think it creates a problem for them, because they don't have simply to deal with the African voices like your voice, my voice, Kodaki, Dion, and so forth. They are now got to deal with Indian voices who have some historical repetition. And when you compare the kind of intervention made by the WPA Indians, and I'm putting it this way, relative to the PVP Indians, you see a marked cultural difference. You see where the disparities between the political culture at the two sides, are so sharp and distinguished. And I think that is a healthy development, probably one of the most healthiest development in terms of multiracial politics, that the WPA Indians, who have a history of struggle, enter the equation, at this historical moment and allow their voices to be heard. And I think they've done a great service to the Indian community in the Indian image, because the Indian image have been taken a battering by the PPP and people by Ravi Dev. Look, for years, I tried to be as balanced as possible with people like Rafi Dev. And I tried to treat Rafi with a lot of dignity and respect for his articulation, even when we may disagree. I have never had a bone of dislike for Rafi. But when Rafi could listen to my speech at Buxton and write in the Times that I call upon the African military to turn the guns on Indian people, that's the end of me and him. That is the end. There's no basis for me to.
We have lost Brother Tacuma Ogunseye there for the moment. Hope he can get back with us. He was making the point about Brother Ravi Dev, and I share the same view. I have always had a cordial relationship. In fact, more than cordial, I consider Ravi Dev a friend. Whenever we've had the chance, if we're waiting to go on to a program, our chat is usually very, very cordial. But I think I feel the same way, that Ravi has gone beyond the kind of polemics that we have been accustomed to over the years. I don't mind an analysis of the objective of my discourse and discourses like mine, but to put that within the context of doing harm to Indian people is where my concern with Ravi is at the moment. In a sense, saying that our objective is to harm Indian people. Ravi Dev knows me. He knows Brother Ogunseye. And to make that leap, I think he has gone into a realm that I have great difficulty seeing the camaraderie. But we shall see. As he said, we shall see. Brother Ogunseye is back with us. Let's get him in. Yes, Brother Ogun, you were talking about Brother Rafi Dev.
Yes, so, look, man, I remember in 2000, it was 2000, and I don't remember the dates well. It might be 2002. I wrote a letter in Kaishore News where I said, I explained my adjustment in my advocacy. Because remember, we came from WPA, we have a certain conception of multiracial politics. And Rafi and Rove came and they challenged that. Okay, and then the subsequent, there's no Indian outcry, okay, from the PPP or outside the PPP to that Rafi-Dem narrative. And subsequent elections has confirmed that the WPA really can't, in a serious way, claim to be speaking for Indians. When the Indian masses have been speaking, politically in a consistent way, that we don't speak for them. And I took the position that, look, in politics, one have to be objective. And even when you don't like what the political situation threw up to you, you have to accept it and you have to find an accommodation. And I decided, look, I would direct my advocacy to African communities in the main, respecting the arguments from Indian activists and Rafi Devon and the way the Indian community, it seems to have endorsed it. And I began not to articulate, okay, my positions in a certain way that I used to do before. But in the light of the oil and all the jeopardies that the oil opened up to us, in January 4th, I published a letter in which I make the point, that we should commit to a new national engagement where one speak for all and all speak for one. I explained that, look, I'm shifting my position. I'm going back to a more WPA, a more normal position. Okay? And I did it out of concern for the nation and hoping that we could begin to bridge the gap between ourselves and people of Rafi Devon and other Indian, comrades who, at the time you felt they meant good. And I felt that this was a good opportunity to us to say, okay, let us in the context of oil, see if we could find a new accommodation. But that is the answer we get from Rafi. That is the answer you get. So again, the saving grace for multiracial politics is the intervention of the WPA Indians as reflected in the intervention of Rohit Kanai and Brother Moses Bagon. And again, the WPA, the WPA seems to be saving the nation again.
Yeah. Let me stretch you a little bit here because I think it's a point that needs clarification. WPA comes out of a history of multi-ethnic politics, as do all, the PNC, the PPP, say the same thing. How do you balance multiracialism but intervening pointedly on the side of one ethnic group? How do you balance the two? Explain that.
Well, I'm sometimes amazed because that question people should not really ask the WPA that. When the WPA came to power, into being, we had the PNC African regime entrenched. And the Indians were complaining about, rig elections, victimizations, all kinds of story. The other thing in Mirror was racial and political discrimination, blah, blah, blah. And the WPA took action in defense of Indian concerns. And I don't know if the WPA, Africans in the WPA, had no problem in defending Indian concerns when the Indian community and the leadership said, look, we oppressed by, the African, party in power. Why would anybody don't expect that if the situation turn as a turn in Guyana and the Indian regime, dominated regime is in power oppressing Africans, that the WPA Africans will not come in defense of African interests? I really I don't even really want to argue that. It is so it doesn't work.
But of course you have to argue it, Brother Ogunseye, because the way in which our politics have developed in the public space, more than half of our population may not know that the WPA defended Indian interests. So I just wanted to say, I get the drift of what you're saying, but even for African people, most of the population may not know that we stood up. And one of the reasons that the PPP sometimes claim Walter Rodney was that Walter Rodney intervened in Guyana between 74 and 80 at a time when Indian complaints of victimhood was very high. And Rodney didn't ask them whether it's true or not. He and the WPA defended them. Ogunseye, speak.
Yeah, and that is true. And that for me give us the credentials to do what we're doing today. And I have no bones about it. If tomorrow the Indian community got problems with the PPP and they feel oppressed and they want solidarity, the WPA will offer solidarity. If the Amerindian community, and we follow Amerindian interests quite a lot, the problem with us is that we don't have the kind of closeness on the ground with the Amerindian community, and the fact that the Amerindians have also developed an Amerindian party. But we keep following Amerindian interests. And when it is necessary, the WPA will speak out on that. We don't have no problems with that. So for us, multiracialism doesn't prevent us from taking ethnic defense. You see, what have happened in the body politics is that a lot of persons who get caught up with the WPA's engagement in the 79, 80, they weren't affair with the fundamentals that influence Askre behavior, IPRA behavior, Ratoon behavior, and so forth that led to the WPA. So they hear the multiracial thing and they see it in a certain way, but it doesn't understand the essence of it. There could be no multiracial politics without ethnic politics.
They want multiracial without the racial.
But you got to explain all those fundamentals to people sometimes. I know. I guess because we're getting old, we pass through the mill. These things are obvious to us and not obvious to other people.
Yeah. Last year, last week, we observed and celebrated UC Kwayana's 98th birthday. He's still around. He, along with Ashton Chase, are probably the only two of that band that were part of the nationalist movement in 1953. You know Kwayana very, very well because your entry into politics was through Askrea. Put Kwayana in context as we celebrate his 98th birthday.
Okay, I'll put it this way. I would say if Guyana needed a politician who have seen politics as service to people and country and seek nothing for self, his whole attitude to power, wealth, and all the spoils that come with political activism and political power, he has stood above the fray and stand out as an example of what human beings could do. We could move above human weaknesses and to resist the temptation of power, wealth, and glory. And I think that is what, for me, Kwayana represents. And as an African leader, okay, I think he brings to the politics of the country over the years, at every critical juncture, a level of honesty and reasonableness, which is absent in today's politics. I have always been struck by the ease in which Kwayana will engage in public criticism of himself. And I have been following the Guyanese, quote unquote, big leaders of the colonial period. I have never seen a Degar, a Burnham, a Jagan engage in any public self-criticism. But I was there I think it was at Bishop High School when Koyana made that presentation, and in it he make a self-criticism of his role in politics and where he felt that he had got it wrong. And that thing stands, for me, as a major contribution to politics, because politics and politicians tend to believe that they're gods in their own right. And they want people to see them as gods, and everything they say got to be true. And every action they make, whether it's right or wrong, must be right. And when a person who has been a major political player could say, look, in this process, I also was learning. I made missteps. It's a level of display of humanity, which is very necessary in politics, because politics deal with power. Politics give you, power over a country and people. And when politicians become so self-serving, as the group of politicians that we have running the state in Guyana, one is not surprised at the condition of the country. So for me, Kwayana stands as one of the brightest stars in Guyanese politics.
Tacuma Ogunseye speaking there on Kwayana. I've put on the screen one of the many comments that we are seeing here tonight, and I want to read it, Brother Ogunseye. And this is Francine saying, I've been a WPA all my life, and I've been having problems with the WPA leaders' approach to members. You guys keep the party as a close network, and that is why we are in this situation today. One day I will speak with you, Dr. Hines, and I want you to speak to that, because I think it's significant, not just for us as WPA leaders, but as an instruction to the PPP and others in the society. Go ahead.
Okay, I think it's, how to put it? It is not that we deliberately seek to restrict the party as a tightly knitted organization. People have to remember that the WPA evolved in a certain historical process. We didn't start as a mass-based electoral party. We started as a revolutionary group, trying to transform the country and engage in revolutionary politics. And by revolutionary politics, we mean politics of change in a profound way. And we found ourselves being, caught in a life and death situation. And the party had to adjust for its survival in that context. And I think that the WPA have never fully transformed itself fully to electoral party. And I think it's part of our weakness and part of our strength. Because there's the unknown element, which I think is also important, because we haven't lost our full character of the past. And while in recent times we operate more and more as an electoral party, within the constraints, the party have never lost its capacity to fight and to survive outside electoral politics.
Yeah, but I want you to address the issue of the WPA itself not knowing the support that it has with it, because this person, I mean, you've been in WPA. This person I have never come into contact with. And when you go through the comments, say the number of people who have said that they have historically identified with the party, I think it goes back to the first question that I asked you about the party's role in the society and the way in which people, they would identify with the PNC and the PPP, because in many regards, there's not much danger in saying, I am PNC, I am PPP. But has been a lot of data in saying, I am WPA. And so therefore the party does not have a sense of sometimes the broad range of support that it has in the society. Go ahead and speak to that.
I think that is true to a point, but I don't know. I think if we look at over time, we have had competing assessments of that reality. I have competing assessments. Some WPL leaders has always been very clear that despite what happened to the party as a result of the polarization electorally and the destruction of the multiracial constituency, that the WPA has maintained a significant support among certain strata of the society. I think the problem for us is organizationally, okay, we haven't been able to build the kind of mass organization to reap the harvest that is out there. The harvest is much larger than our capacity to reap it. And it is tied up with resource issues and all kinds of things. Because the WPA, I don't know, based upon our resource situation, we shouldn't exist. I mean, we exist mainly out of a tradition of massive commitment of our active members, both who are public and those who are private. We have never been blessed with having the PPP have always been getting money from Moscow, the PNC get money from here, there, the diaspora, both Indian and African diaspora significantly support the party. The WPA, for some reason, we're not tied to any business class. Nobody don't control the WPA.
Well, you're a radical party, brother. That answers it. Nowhere in the world except when revolution do radical parties get the kind of thing. But
so we always have that kind of organizational deficiency to reap the goodwill we have out there. And when the AFC came with tremendous resources, were able to put an organization in place, they were able to reap our harvest. But because politics is about ideas and politics is about struggle, that what they reap is short term. When the crunch come, as the crunch is now, this is when who is where and who is what. And here again, the WPA is distinguishing itself. Because we gotta be very frank. At this juncture, the party is clear. Whatever the price we have to pay for this line of march, we prepare to pay it. Are we not making a secret? It is open public politics. At this juncture, we think that we have a role to play in the interest of African community and the nation. And whatever is the price we have to pay, we prepare to pay it. Are we saying upfront?
Mm-hmm. In true Rodneyite, Quietite tradition, whatever price is to be paid. 2 mornings ago, a friend of the WPA woke me up to ask me, how is Brother Ogunseye holding up? I said, man, that's why you wake me up all the morning for ask me, how is Brother Ogunseye holding up? I said, man, I can't answer. I can't answer. He said, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Brother Tacuma Ogunseye here tonight, talking to us about contemporary Guyanese politics, even though he's a political prisoner. Brother Ogunseye, where the WPA goes in the short run. I'm not talking about medium term or long term. In the short run.
I think in the short run, the WPA has to continue its campaign to influence what happens with these local government elections. I think this is critical for what happened after local government elections, what happened at the national elections. We have made it clear we can't make a separation. If we get it wrong here, we're convinced we can get it wrong down the road. And I think that in the short term, the WPA have to keep its eyes on the price. And the price is to turn the local government elections into a day of national, resistance and uprising. Politically, people must know that Guinea's response to the PPP is rejection and open political, rejection. And I think that in the short term has to be our line of march. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe that the Guyanese people are looking, for some way to speak to the issue. And I have a sense that the PP may be very surprised at the Indian behavior in these local government elections. I'm getting a sense that they'll be very surprised. And if the African leadership do the correct thing, I think the PP will get a rude awakening that there is deep resentment, of the way in which they have been governing and the risks that they're exposing unnecessarily the Indian community to.
Yes. And I think we got a peek into that today, where Lawrence Ramsamy, in an article in the Guyana Times, is almost begging the WPA and the AFC to participate in local government elections. Almost begging. Because I think they now realize that one of the things that your intervention and the WPA's intervention has brought into the open their own legitimacy. And they have, remember, their narrative has put that legitimacy so wrongly on elections. That is why Ravi Dev has been trying to paint the WPA as anti-election. We don't believe in election. So they've placed their legitimacy on elections in order to say, whatever we may do, we may break down people's house, we may jail them, we may do all kind of things, but we are electorally, we were elected legitimately. And I think part of what we're challenging is that electoral legitimacy is to say you are not legitimate because the elections are crooked. And so the participation in local government election is part of the question of legitimacy. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. But I think the WP have gone further. We are raising the question of the governance system in the country.
Yes.
And we want to end to this. We want to take all elections. Not be against elections. We want the elections in a new arrangement. But so those who think that we're...
It's not their job to flesh it out for us. They're never going to do that.
So we are very clear on our line of march.
Yeah.
And I want to add one thing, and this is where I'm convinced that the PPP chose the 12th of June to conduct the rig elections because they want to celebrate on June 13th the victory. And it's an abomination to the dignity and to the legacy of Walter Rodney. And, I've tried to understand why is it, these parties, and we have saw a similar behavior from our own allies in the APMU on this matter. I don't know why they think that there's not some bottom line as it relates to Rodney, that the WPA will kick people ass. You could forget about all the other issues you raised for the time being. But to have an elections that you plan to rig on the 12th of June and to celebrate your victory on June 13th. You're pushing the WPA across the line. And for no other reason, we have to fight you in defense of Walter Rodney's legacy and dignity. And I hope I don't like to engage the Rodney family, and as a position of policy, we don't engage the Rodney family in public things. But I hope the Rodney Foundation and their family and everybody is listening, to the engagement and see who is defending Walter's dignity in the most profound way.
Yes. And Francine, I think, gives us a very optimistic note on which to end. As long as the spirit of Walter Rodney lives, the WPA will rise. And whenever the WPA rises, the country rises. Our politics have never been a politics of isolation, but certainly always a politics of broadening the possibilities for all Guyanese. Thank you all very much for staying with us tonight. Now, I am going to be off tomorrow night. Duty calls. I am moderating a very big forum here at my university tomorrow. One of African Americans leading scholars is going to be at our university tonight, and I've been given the opportunity to be one of the two moderators. Those of you who know of that book, How to Become an Anti-Racist. The author of that book is going to be here tomorrow night at my university, and I've been given that opportunity, that privilege, if you will, to co-moderate that lecture. Is one of our biggest lectures at the university. So I will be off tomorrow night for good reasons. I want you all to understand, but I'll be back. I'll be back on Friday night. I'll be back on Friday night. So again, thank you all for tuning in tonight and to hear the first major interview given by Tacuma Ogunseye. Tacuma Ogunseye, whose name is on the lips of all of us. Good night. See you all on Friday night.